Hello, all students. You are listening to podcast Botany for NEET by S. Ramakrishna. Today podcast we are going to discuss the topic the diversity in the living world. At first reading of NCERT text, it appears compact, unclear, difficult. But in reality, it is a compressed scientific language, conceptual connections, and conjunctional sentences with hidden meaning. So simply reading the textual lines by yourself and underlining it without understanding the underlying hidden logic just to create a confusion and also drives your learning energies. So listen to the lecture first, focus your attention, don't skip, don't scroll. Because at the time of examination, you cannot recall the sentences or words you underline under pressure. You can recall the logic that delivered to you by lecturer. And your duty is to conceive and connect to the dots delivered by the lecture by carefully listening to the lecture. So keep the NCERT textbook open with you. How my delivery synchronizes with NCERT text by unraveling all the knots of NCERT text. In very first introductory part, it is having few sentences. The first, biology. The study of life forms and living process. Nothing but story of life of living organisms. Its structure, its function, various process, photosynthesis, respiration, transpiration in plant, excretion, circulation, digestion in case of animal. So study of life form and living process constitute biology. In living world, there is an amazing range of diversity of the living types. Certainly it is amazing range because microscopic, macroscopic, different sizes, different shape and different habitats. So living world is so amazing. And early man could easily perceive the difference between inanimate, non-living and animate living things because no scientific knowledge is required to differentiate inanimate and animate. And early man defied some of inanimate, wind, sea, fire, and some of animate living, that is, the plants or the trees and wild animals. Who defied means who challenged the natural things, wind, sea, fire. They evoked a common response, a sense of awe, a mixed feeling, more fearful, less joyous, who initially challenged because humans constantly struggled a lot to face the wind, fire, sea, storms, and wild animals. They attempted to control for their survival. But in due course of time, they realized that nature having an immense power than human power, and finally realized and coexist with natural environment rather than simply or merely challenging the natural forces. So challenging nature to compromising nature. Next, the description of living organism including human beings much later in case of human history. Description of living organism, plant and animal and microbe is not a simple task. It requires manpower, the time, efforts and expenditure and instrument scientific knowledge. That's why physics and chemistry developed earlier than advancement of biological knowledge. Next, societies or group of person indulged in anthropocentric view of biology registered very limited progress in biological knowledge. What is anthropocentric view? The anthropocentric view is human centered. Humans are central in biology because humans believed that the humans are independent, not interdependent, And all organisms in nature, they viewed them as a source of food. So it is a egocentric view, not a ecocentric view. That's why biology registered very limited progress. Next, systematic monumental description of life form brought in out of necessity detailed systems of identification, nomenclature, classification. So conjunction of sentences, but a broad meaning. The huge diversity of organism, bewildering diversity, confusing diversity, vast diversity. So, it is a difficult or a monumental task to know about the organism, to study about the organism. So, casual approach is not sufficient. There must be something ordered, structural, and scientific. So, out of necessity to know about the huge diversity of organism, systematics developed. That is, systematic arrangement of organism. It includes identification, nomenclature, classification. We identified the organism based on similarities and dissimilarities. We named the organism based on certain principle. We grouped the organism into categories based on similarities, affinities, relationship. So biggest spin-offs studies by understanding, with identification, nomenclature, classification, recognize the fact that organisms share similarities horizontally as well as vertically. That is, present day living organisms not only related to each other, having relationship with the organism that lived in the past, that is ancestral relation. The what we call it is vertical relation. Suppose for example, humans, monkey, gorilla, chimpanzee, they share certain common features. They are in the same group horizontal. In case of vertical relationship, modern humans are supposed to be evolved from ancestral primates. So, the relationship between ancestor and descendant, what we call vertical relation, and present day living organism is horizontal relation. Such horizontal and vertical relationship understanding, such a revelation made man humble towards the nature to conserve biodiversity who started cultural movement. So, egocentric view to ecocentric view. Humans believed that they are independent, not interdependent. And finally, to ecocentric view. So, we are not above the nature, we are the part of this nature. So, who started cultural movement? Certain traditional communities having a great respect towards the nature. Bishnoi community, they treat certain animals as a sacred animal, that is black buck, Krishna Jinka. They worship trees. So, traditional cultural belief also responsible for conservation of biodiversity. We often worship the rivers Yamuna and Ganga, certain trees like it is people, plants like osimum, and animals like cow, snake, and black buck, Krishna Jinka. So we often worship these things, nothing but traditional belief or culture also meant for conservation of biodiversity. So science taught us interdependence, culture taught us conservation. So science itself, mere science is not going to contribute for conservation. There must be moral responsibility from human side. So science and culture together responsible for conservation of biodiversity. That's why man who became humble toward the nature to conserve biodiversity, who initiated cultural movements. So in this topic, we are going to describe the organism, classification of organism, and taxonomic perspective view. Based on characters, it is universally accepted. Next, Ernest Mayr. Ernest Mayr, a German-based scientist who belongs to Harvard University and who joined as faculty of arts and science, was considered to be Darwin of 20th century. Darwin contributed in 19th century as evolutionary biologist and Ernest Mayr in 20th century as a modern evolutionary biologist. So considered to be Darwin of 20th century. And he was one among 100 great scientists. And Ernest Mayr contributions origin of species diversity, who single-handedly involved in origin of species diversity, the central question of evolutionary biology. Darwin explained how evolution occurs in a species, and Ernest Mayr contribution what is the reason for species diversity and what is the reason for enormous biological diversity, that is what they call speciation. And another contribution, the definition of biological species. Currently accepted definition of biological species attributable to Ernest Mayr. Because there are so many definitions for the species, ecological species, phylogenetic species, morphological species, so many taxonomic species, but most accepted definition, it is based on reproductive isolation, it is biological species. In reproductive isolation, closely related species freely interbreed to produce fertile offspring. So it is reproductively isolated from other species. Next, and who got the 3 prizes, Bellajahn Prize, International Prize for Biology, and a Crawford Prize, and who contributed in 80 year span multidisciplinary, that is zoology, biology, philosophy, evolution, geography. So his contribution spanned in different branches. Born in 1904, died in 2004. So in 80 years of span, whose contribution is lot. That's why who considered to be father of modern evolutionary biologist of 20th century, also considered to be Darwin of 20th century. In 1957, who retired by assuming the title of Alexander Agassiz Professor of Zoology Emeritus. Alexander Agassiz Professor of Zoology. So, a professor chairship was created at Harvard University. Ernest Mayr occupied that chair after retirement to honor the contribution in that particular sector. The word emeritus added. That means it was given to the retired professor based on his contribution. So Alexander Agassiz, Professor of Zoology Emeritus. So emeritus is not a place, not a job. It is a honor to the professor after his retirement.